Hello, welcome back to Broyhill on Aviation Leadership. Glad you're with us today. This is episode 14 in the Leadership Trait series, and in this episode, we're going to discuss the leadership trait of decisiveness. We've got a great anecdote at the end about an experience I had at Red Flag, an Air Force wargaming exercise many years ago that you're not going to want to miss. Don't forget that this trait, like all of the other traits in the series, can be found and discussed in this book, Business Aviation Leadership from the Traits to the Trenches. It's available on all online retailers and at my website, www.chrisbroyhillbooks.com. So let's get on with the discussion. But first, a word from our sponsor. In most of the chapters in this book, when I go through the definitions of the individual traits, that section only lasts like maybe a page and a half. However, in decisiveness, there's quite a bit I felt like I needed to get through. The Merriam-Webster book definition, dictionary definition of decisiveness, pretty straightforward. Having the power or quality of deciding. Resolute, determined. We'll talk about determination in the next chapter and final chapter of the series. Unmistakable, unquestionable. So decisiveness seems like it's the quality of being decisive, right? Seems to make sense. But I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper and try to get, as we have in the other episodes, some of the leadership contexts of decisiveness. So there was a group called the Four Corners Leadership Council, and here's how they define decisiveness in terms of leadership. Decisiveness, they say, is the ability to cut quickly to the heart of the matter. It involves getting to the fundamental issues and making a clear, concrete call. Decisiveness knows what facts are important to consider when making a decision, knowing the right decision to make, and taking the responsibility to see that decision through to completion. But why is decisiveness so important to a leader then? Well, Perry Smith is one of my favorite writers on the subject of leadership in a famous book called Taking Charge. Says this, he says a leader must be decisive. Institutions and organizations need decisions. A non-decision is itself a decision and should be recognized for what it is. And you and I have all been in organizations where we have seen leaders just plain not decide. Well, when they don't decide, they are, in fact, deciding, just doing so in a very uncourageous way, shall we say. Now, there's a quote that goes around out there about making decisions that's often attributed to Theodore Roosevelt, but I could find no evidence that he actually said it. But the quote goes something like this. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. Think about that. Now, there was an article I found in the Harvard Business Review, and it was published in May and June of 2017. There were these four researchers that presented the results of what they called the CEO genome study. Essentially, what are the DNA of successful CEOs? What makes them work? It was a 10-year analysis to try to identify the specific attributes that differentiate high-performing CEOs. To perform the study, the researchers tapped into a database of 17,000 C-suite executives. 17,000, that's a pretty good sample size. I'm a statistician. I'm here to tell you that's a great sample size. And they had 2,000 CEOs among the 17,000. So in the study, the researchers identified four behaviors that set apart high-performing CEOs. And the first one on that list is deciding with speed and conviction. So the researchers went on to describe why that was so. And the quote is good. It's a long one, but stay with me. It's worth it to hear. Legends about CEOs who always seem to know exactly how to steer their companies to wild success seem to abound in business, the researchers said. But we discovered that high-performing CEOs do not necessarily stand out for making great decisions all the time. Rather, they stand out for being more decisive. They make decisions earlier, faster, and with greater conviction. They do so consistently, even amid ambiguity, with incomplete information and in unfamiliar domains. In our data, people who were described as decisive were 12 times more likely to be high-performing CEOs. Pretty interesting. The stats for the trait of decisiveness were interesting as well. The overall mean was 5.80. That's on a scale, remember. We asked respondents to rate the importance of the various traits, and they had to rate them using a scale from 1 to 7. And they rated overall, the overall mean for decisiveness was 5.80. The leader's mean was 5.85. The followers was 5.76. And Levine's test for variance was not significant. So the two means, while numerically different, are statistically equivalent. When we asked the leaders and followers to rank from 1 to 3, their most important 3 attributes, decisiveness was 14th out of 15, believe it or not, which is why it's chapter 14 in the book. But interestingly, if we rated the different attributes by or we ranked the different attributes by the mean value of the ratings, it moved decisiveness up from 14th up as high as 9. So in general, the need for decisiveness is pretty well recognized. In the fall of 1989, I attended the A-10 Fighter Weapons Instructor course at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. It was a 4-month course of instruction that provided what was essentially a Ph.D. in A-10 employment, and it's probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. The culmination of the course was a 2-week large force employment exercise where scores of outside aircraft were flown in, and the students from the various schools at the time, the F-15, the F-16, the A-10, and the F-111, are tested on what they've learned in an environment that is the next thing to actual combat. To call it demanding would be an understatement of epic proportions. I was one of 5 pilots in my A-10 class, and since only air-to-ground pilots could be in charge of the mission package, 2 of us were designated to be mission commanders for the Blue Force. Dar Kemp, a fellow A-10 pilot from RAF Alconbury, and had the helm on day 3, and on day 4, yours truly was going to be the mission commander. Now, the mission commander is responsible for the entire conduct of that day's battle. He has to understand the target array, build a game plan to strike all the targets and deconflict aircraft on and off target, coordinate air refueling, air-to-air fighter support, electronic warfare support, and develop his own game plan to get his 4-ship formation to its own target and attack it with survivable tactics. On the day in question, the mission commander leads a strike package of 50-plus aircraft into simulated battle. Now, I didn't fly on the day my fellow hog driver, Dar Kemp, conducted his mission because I was planning mine for the following day. But as I began to coordinate the elements of mission preparation, one of the pilots from the B-52 wing that was supporting the exercise cornered me. "Your buddy got us shot down again today," he said without any sort of preamble. "What?" I asked. "We were shot down again. You keep sending us in with the main package. And because they're all faster than we are, they get to the target area first and are coming off target by the time we get there. Then Red Air pounces on us and shoots us like fish in a barrel." I was nodding as he spoke. The B-52 flew at about 350 knots, and all the other aircraft, with the exception of us and the lowly A-10, flew at 480 on the ingress and 540 on the final attack run. The A-10 slower speed didn't hurt us as much, though, because we attacked targets on the forward edge of the battle area where the mock armies made contact, while the Buffs had to penetrate deep into enemy territory to drop their payload. The B-52 pilot put his finger right into my chest and he said, "I'm flying your package tomorrow. I don't want to die, even if it is simulated. You need to come up with a different plan." 3 hours later, I was on a small stage in front of a room full of representatives from all the different aircraft that I'd be commanding the following day. I had decided on a game plan, but I wasn't anxious to share it. I turned on the overhead projector. No computers with PowerPoint back then. We had an old-fashioned overhead projector that we actually had to draw on. And I began to go through the lineup of aircraft that would be participating to ensure the appropriate personnel were present. They were. So now it was time for me to reveal my game plan. I put up a series of slides that showed the terrain under the Nellis airspace for orientation purposes, since we were flying at low altitude using Cold War tactics for the mission. Each slide had the call signs of the various flights in my package and the timeline for their departure from a place we called Student Gap, which was the starting point for the westward ingress to the target area. I had the group's attention with the first slide, which showed the B-52 as the first aircraft through the gap. We, the A-10s, were next, and the fast movers followed after making one 360-degree turn in the orbit area. The pilots in the room were incredulous. Many were laughing. "That's crazy," they said. "Red Air will jump on that buff as soon as it gets through the gap." I shrugged. "Maybe. But if Red Air commits on the buff, our Blue Air will kill them early, and the rest of the strike package will get through without being touched. And if they don't commit until the main package arrives, it will be a standard battle, only by the time they tangle with the main package, the buff will be off target." The room was quieter now as the group considered what I had said. After another 15 minutes of discussion, the briefing ended, and we went back to our individual planning rooms. The B-52 pilot I had met previously cornered me as I left the room. He was nodding. "Gutsy call," he said. "I hope it doesn't get us killed." "Me too," I replied. Fast forward 24 hours, the strike was successful, the B-52 lived, and I drank free at the Officers Club the following Friday night. What's the moral of the story? Sometimes being decisive requires the courage to think out of the box and stick by your decision when you're challenged. I was a 30-year-old captain at the time, and I had to stand up to a room full of senior captains, majors, lieutenant colonels when I made that pitch. I was probably one of the more junior guys in the room. They had more experience than I did and had every reason to believe the plan would fail. They were skeptical, but they were willing to be led and attempt a new way to accomplish the mission. Why? For one reason and one reason only: because I was decisive. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Leadership Traits series. If you like the video, you'll love the book, Business Aviation Leadership from the Traits to the Trenches. It's got the information you saw in this video, as well as stories from over 50 leaders in our industry as they have applied the different attributes we've discussed in the series. All the profits, net profits from sales of this book, by the way, go to the Leadership Conference Scholarship Fund, so they make our industry better. Before you go, please hit the subscribe and like button down there at the bottom. Also below this video in the comments, you'll find a link to my consulting website, citadelconsultingservices.com, where you can find a page on the AirComp calculator, the only online engine for compensation analysis available anywhere in the world. Thanks again for your time, and until the next time, tailwinds.